In the last C++ lesson, we learned how to use relational operators to compare data, and we also learned how to use logical operators and combined expressions. In today's video, we will learn how to receive user input. It is really important to receive input from the user in our application. We know that we use the console to be able to view an output. Like when we use cout, we will view the message of cout inside the console. But we could also use this console to be able to give input and receive this input. So the first step of actually receiving an input is to, first of all, we need to declare the variables that will store the data given by the user from the input. So let's say we want the user to give us the name, last name, age, and their salary. We need 4 variables that will store these respective data. So name and last name will be string variables. So let's declare 2 string variables, name and last name. Next, we need to store the age of the user. So let me declare a empty age variable of type integer. So right here we have 2 empty variables of type string. Here we have the age variable of type integer. Now for the salary, we need a double variable or a variable of type double. So I'll say double salary, and this is where we will store the user salary. Now what we need to do here is to give the user some kind of message for the user to be able to understand what they will input right now. So I'll say something like cout input name. So a simple message to tell the user what to input. Next, we will use cin to receive the input and store it inside a variable. So I'll say cin, and after this, I will use this operator, which is called the extraction operator. Right here, this is called the insertion operator. It is used with cout. But with cin, we use the extraction operator. After this operator, we will give the name of the variable that will store the data. So I'll say name. So when the user wants to input their name, it will be received by cin, and the data will be stored inside this variable. Let me show it to you. So I'll say cout name right here to display the name given. I'll go ahead and say something like, first of all, compile, then launch. Let me give John. As you can see, we received John, and it is being stored inside the name variable, and then we are printing what is inside the name variable. So we successfully received input and displayed the input. Now let's do the same thing for the other variables. Now let's go ahead and display these variables or these values. So I'll say cout name and give a space, and I'll say last name, also give a space. I'll say age, space, and salary. There you go. Okay, now let's run the program. So compile and launch. As you can see, so John, I wrote John wrong, so John Davis, for example, 45, salary 123.456, and there you go. We successfully received input from the user, and we printed the input because we were able to actually store the input inside those 4 variables, and then we were able to display them. Okay, now you might tell me that why should we have 2 variables, name and last name, to be able to store the name of the user? Why couldn't we have a single variable called full name? Let us say we will have a variable called full name, okay? So full name. So what I will do right now is delete this, and what I'm going to do is allow the user to just input their full name. So I'll say here cin full name, and I'll fix the message, so I'll say full name. So what I'm expecting from the user is to give us their full name. So John Davis must be printed on a single line. So let's try it. Will it work? Let us see. So let me go ahead, launch or compile, excuse me, then launch. I'll say John Davis on a single line. I'll press enter, and we have a problem. We couldn't input or give input for age and salary. And why did this happen? Oh, by the way, let me go ahead and redo this. Let me go ahead and cout full name. Let us see what this variable will store. So let me clear the interface first of all. So cls, and now let me compile, then launch the code. So John Davis again, and look at this, it gave us John, it didn't give us John Davis. So what happened exactly in this scope? So let us explain what happened. So what we need to understand here is the very nature of cin. Cin only allows us to give input, but input that doesn't contain any white space. So as you can see right here, there's white space. And Cin doesn't allow that. So Cin will only allow you to give John, but as soon as it sees white space, it will consider it as the end of the input and it will move on. So as you can see right here, John was printed without Davis because DCN saw that there's a white space right here, so it considered it as no input anymore. Okay, so Cin only allows you to give a single word, okay, or words without white space. But that doesn't explain us why we couldn't give input for age and salary. So there is something called the input buffer. This is a temporary storage for input values. Now because the Cin didn't receive Davis right here, that's because it saw a white space and it doesn't allow white space. So what will happen to this value? It will go ahead and it will be stored inside the input buffer. Now the input buffer doesn't know what to do with this value. Should it go ahead and store it inside the age variable or the salary variable? Well, it cannot store it inside these variables because it is of type string and these are of type integer and double. So what will the input buffer do in this case? Well, it cannot do anything and the input operation now is disrupted. So that is why we couldn't input anything right here. What we will do here is we will use something called Getline. It is a function that we will use. So let me go ahead and delete everything right here and let us see how to use Getline. So Getline should be used by including a library called string, a header file called string. So this header file string is similar to the iostream header file. Not in functionalities, I mean there are both header files, but of course they contain different functionalities. So the header file called string contain multiple functionalities, but the functionality we care about is the getLine function. So we will use it in our code. So let me go ahead and write here and write a simple message like input full name. I deleted it earlier, and let me go ahead and right now say something like getLine Cin full name, and don't worry, I'll explain it right now. So what is exactly happening here? So remember, the getLine function comes from the string header file. But how does it work? So this is the second function we see in this lesson. The first function was the size of function that we saw in this video or in this lesson. But what is exactly a function? So a function contains reusable code. So inside the getLine function, there is code written by C++ developers or the C++ developer, and we could use this code by calling the function by mentioning its name. Now some functions in C++ or in general take arguments or inputs. As you can see here, the getLine function takes two arguments or two inputs. What are these arguments and input? The first argument that you always need to mention with the getLine function is the Cin. Always the Cin will be the first argument. And the second argument should be the variable or the string variable that will store the data given by the user. So why string? Because you will only use getLine for strings, okay, for long phrases or phrases that contain white space. Keep in mind that you cannot flip their places, so you cannot say full name right here and Cin right here. It doesn't work, it will be wrong. Always Cin comes first, then the variable that will store the data or the input given by the user. So let's go ahead and say cout full name. Let us see if it works properly. So I'll go ahead, compile and launch this. I'll say John Davis, and good, it works properly. So getLine allows us to give input that contains white space, while Cin doesn't allow it, because this is the very nature of Cin. So getLine solved this problem by allowing us to input long phrases. So let's say I will run this another time. I'll write this and give space like this. As you can see, it will still work. It allows us to give space. But of course, when you press enter, it will interpret this as you are finishing your input, and it will go ahead and stop the input and will store the data or the input given by the user inside the full name variable. So keep this in mind. Now that we know about Cin, let's go ahead and complete the others. So I'll say cout again here. I'll say input age like this and go ahead and say Cin age. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the salary. So input salary and go ahead and say Cin salary. Now let's display a small message like cout full name is going to be full name, and we'll mention endl for a new line. I'll go ahead and say cout, and what will be age, and age, make sure to mention endl for new line again, and the last cout for this, it will be for the salary. So I'll say something like salary and mention a $sign right here, and I'll say salary like this. Now let me clear the input and compile, then run the file. So I'll say John Davis, age 45, salary 123.456. As you can see, it works properly. So we were able to gain input from the user. We used getLine right here to be able to give long phrases or full name, or simply sentences that contain white space. And we have age right here used with Cin, as well as we have the salary of the user. Now let me address a problem that you might meet with Cin and Getline. So as you can see here, Cin comes before Getline. And maybe this will happen with you, that Cin will come before Getline, and there will be a problem that will happen right now. I will open the terminal and let us see what this problem will be. So input age, I'll say 45, but I'm not allowed to give input for full name. So what exactly happened here? So let's go ahead and explain this. So what will happen is that when you give input with Cin and press enter right here, what it will do is that as soon as you press enter, actually, it will interpret this as a new line. So you basically are passing a new line. This new line will be passed to the input buffer, the temporary storage for input values. Now what this input buffer will do with the new line? It doesn't know what to do with it. Next, as you can see, we have a getLine function to receive the full name of the user. So this is the opportunity for the getLine to for the input buffer to insert the new line inside the getLine function. So what will the getLine function do here in this situation is that it will see that it has a new line given by someone, by the input buffer in this case, not by the user, or not by us actually. So what the new line means for getLine is that us, the developers, gave the input that we want, or the user gave the input that they want, and press enter. But the user didn't give any input. So what's happening here is that the getLine function thinks that you gave an input, but in reality you didn't give an input. The input buffer inserted the new line into the getLine function, making the getLine function believe that you gave an input, but in reality you didn't give an input. That is why it's not allowing us to give input for the getLine function. What we need to do here is to clear or ignore the input buffer. So right after this Cin, I'll say Cin.ignore, and this is a method or a function, and what this will do is it will clear the input buffer. So I'll compile, interpret, and 45, let's say. As you can see, now I am allowed to give a full name. Because what will happen is that the input buffer will receive the new line given by the Cin, but because we said somewhere right here, we said Cin.ignore, it will ignore or clear the input buffer from this new line, and it will allow us to give input with the getLine function. So I'll go ahead and say John Davis. As you can see, it works properly. Now, if you want to know why this is wrote like this, let me explain it to you, but don't worry if you don't understand. It is still an advanced topic for us. It is related to classes and objects, which we will see further in this course, but it is an advanced topic to discuss. But if you want further information, I will explain to you why we wrote it like this. So Cin actually is an object of a class called iStream. So if I hover on Cin, as you can see, there is a class called iStream. So meaning Cin is an object of type iStream. Just like the variable full name right here, it is actually an object of type string. Same goes for the Cin. It is an object of type iStream. Now, any object can access the functionalities of their classes. So full name is a object of type string. If I go ahead and say full name right here and use the dot notation, as you can see, there is multiple functionalities that we could use with strings, right? So this is an object. An object can access functionalities of their classes. So we use the object full name that is of type string to be able to access the functionalities that are inside the class called string. Same for the Cin object. Because it is an object of a library, or a class called iStream, it can access the functionalities of this class. Now I know it is an advanced topic and you don't have to understand it right now, but you can keep this in mind. It is extra information, but don't worry about understanding it because we will see it further in this course and of course when we arrive to object-oriented programming or classes and objects in C++. And this is it for this lesson. This is how you can gain input or receive input from the user using Cin and Getline. If you missed the previous C++ lesson, make sure to check it out, link in the description. And make sure to subscribe to follow me in this C++ tutorial series. Thank you for watching this video. I invite you to watch one of these end screens that will appear right now, and I hope to see you in the next video.